You're listening to Systemic Error Podcast. The failure was designed.
James Comer admits he's spent zero amount of minutes on Trump's reflecting pool based on an article by Matt Laszlo. A president invents a sabotage story and his own party pretends not to hear it. Power is doing the talking. The basic power map here is not complicated. Trump has the megaphone, Comer has the committee gavel, and the White House controls the evidence it has failed to produce. The reflecting pool story is less about vandalism than about who gets to turn a thin claim into a political object. Comer made the useful part explicit. His committee is not going to chase Trump's alleged pool vandalism. It is busy with Medicare and Medicaid fraud and the Epstein investigation. In other words, there are real abuses of institutional power available to investigate, and this spectacle is not one of them. The claim comes before the proof. Trump has spent days treating the Lincoln Memorial reflecting pool as if it were the site of an attack, claiming without evidence that someone slashed a 350-foot gash into the lining and that multiple arrests had already happened. The reporting says the opposite of certainty. Independent experts have said the green water was the result of a natural algae bloom, and the White House has offered no evidence of vandalism. That gap matters. This is not our case of confused interpretation. It is a president making an accusation first and leaving the facts to chase it later, if they ever do. Comer's shrug is not neutrality. Comer's answer was not an investigation. It was institutional sidestepping with a polite accent. He said he had spent zero amount of minutes thinking about the pool, and that is probably the most honest thing said in the story. He is not validating the fantasy, but he is also not confronting the larger pattern that produced it. That matters because Republican distance here is itself a political act. It signals that Trump's claim is weak enough to ignore, but not weak enough to openly reject. The party's default setting is to let the president improvise reality, while low-level officials refuse to clean up the mess. The decoy works because it is cheap. The alleged vandalism story has all the familiar ingredients of cheap political misdirection: a dramatic image, an unnamed villain, and a public space turned into a stage set for grievance. It is much easier to summon outrage over a pool than to account for fraud, health policy, or actual institutional abuse. The only widely reported arrest in the story is not some grand saboteur at all, but a 67-year-old former Olympian charged with a misdemeanor after touching a loose piece of paint, which he denies damaging. That detail exposes the inflation at work. The public is being pushed toward a lurid conspiracy, while the actual reported conduct is minor, disputed, and far below the scale of the rhetoric. The real pattern is manufactured crisis. This is a familiar authoritarian habit in miniature: manufacture a threat, demand attention, and let subordinates quietly refuse to validate the fiction without ever naming it as fiction. The point is not truth. The point is domination of the agenda. Trump supplies the accusation. The bureaucracy is left to absorb the absurdity. Republicans like Comer then perform distance just far enough to avoid owning the lie, but not far enough to admit how the lie functions. That is how propaganda survives in a system that still has enough self-respect to blush, but not enough courage to say no. The lesson: the reflecting pool is not the story. The story is how quickly a president can try to convert a mundane environmental condition into sabotage, and how readily his party responds with selective amnesia instead of accountability. When power cannot defend its claims, it often falls back on spectacle. When allies will not confront it, they become part of the mechanism. What this reveals is not confusion. It is a government culture trained to treat distortion as a manageable inconvenience, even when the distortion comes from the top. You've been listening to Systemic Error. Thanks to Raw Story for today's article. With it automated voice of Bryce, thanks for listening.